you obviously mentioned not working with JJ Abrams, but
Yes.
negotiating with him so that you could produce that
Well, see,
Sulu
yeah,
episode.
well, one thing I'm very lucky about is because I wrote the Twilight Zone Companion when I was essentially in my 20s. A whole generation of showrunners read that book when they were teenagers, and that's what made them decide to become uh, writer producers in television. Just the way when I read Making of Star Trek, that put the seed in my head. So years ago, they were doing the Museum of Radio and Television. The Paley Center was doing a presentation on Twilight Zone where they had writers, directors, producers from the original show. They were all elderly by then, and I was on the stage with them. There were 15 of them and me. And at the end of the evening, there were like a couple thousand people in the audience or something. And at the end of the evening, someone from the audience came up to the footlights of the stage and he said, "I'm a big fan of your work. I'd love to take you out to lunch. My name's JJ Abrams." And so that's how I met JJ. That was when Felicity was on the air. So it was pretty early in his career. And that's how I knew him, but it's, but again, everyone's trying to create stuff of meaning. I mean, very few of the people I meet in Hollywood are hacks. They're not, you meet those people. They are there. The people are just saying, well, I'm just going to take the money and run. There are cynics and no talent people, but a lot of them are just, they're trying to make it work. They're trying to find a way to navigate this sea and create something meaningful, to the best of their abilities. And sometimes they might not have great abilities, or they might, and then there's people like Michael Bay, and that's a whole nother subject, so where it's like, okay, it's directed by Michael Bay, I'm gonna take a pass on that one, so
I've got like not so much the more recent stuff with like Transformers and stuff, but I got a real soft spot for his brand of just big, overblown, beefy action movies. Like I think there's a place for stuff like that, 100%.
Yeah. I'm sorry that way with Roland Emmerich. It's like Moonfall. It's like, okay,
yeah.
it's a bad movie, but it's a fun bad movie. For me. But yeah, absolutely. But again, the lovely thing. See, it's fascinating because I don't have a hierarchy in terms of media. I think that you're like equivalent to someone on CBS, for instance. It's like YouTube has a wonderful quality of kind of leveling the field. And so I think that your commentary and your criticism is important, frankly, because I think there aren't many people who are standing up and saying, "Look, this thing is shit. This is why it's shit," and being articulate about it. I mean, you have the fun gag of critical drinker and all of that, but underneath that fun trope is really articulate and really thoughtful examination of what works and what doesn't, and why it works and why it doesn't. And I think that's useful and important. So I'm just saying, I'm a fan of your work too.
No, thank you. Yeah, the question I was going to ask you, with regards to JJ, and he's obviously a little bit of a divisive figure amongst fandoms because he's a man who took Star Trek, reinvigorated it in some ways, but then took it in a whole new direction with a much more action focused. He's the guy who brought back Star Wars as well and reinstated those movies after a pretty long hiatus, but then then led into the Star Wars sequel trilogy, which people are generally not in favor of. I think if I was to put it diplomatically. What is your sense about like what he's trying to accomplish? Is he just a guy who's having to wrestle with a whole lot of different priorities and he's doing his best in a difficult situation, or is he just, I don't know, is he like a Michael Bay type of director who's just like, I've got a bunch of action scenes I want to do?
Here's several things about that. I mean, he's a nice guy. He's a very nice guy, and he works very, very hard. Part of it is he wasn't a Star Trek fan, and so he brought others aboard who were, to kind of find that middle ground of making a movie that would appeal to both fans, Star Trek fans, and those who weren't. And he made a lot of choices that I thought were good, like going back to the sort of the aesthetic of those uniforms and so forth. But the problem was, I think he's good. He's a good interpreter of stuff, but not an originator of stuff. He's not like Spielberg, okay, or James Cameron, particularly, who come up with stuff just, those are original fresh talents. I mean, they might make a clunker of a movie here and there, but they're hot out of the gate. And but JJ was a huge fan of Star Wars, and he didn't want to wreck it. He didn't want to fuck it up. So But essentially, that the first of those Star Wars movies he made was very much like just sort of like a retread of the first Star Wars movie. It's just kind of like, if you like that, here's something similar that you'll also like, you know. But then it went totally left field with Last Jedi and all that stuff, and you know, it just, you know, was like an exploding cigar. But if you think of it, if you take a step back and say, wait a minute, that made money. Those films made money, and so as a result, you can get The Mandalorian, for instance. And you know, I haven't watched a lot of The Mandalorian, but I know from my friends who are Star Wars fans, they like The Mandalorian. So, or you can say, okay, well, maybe JJ's Star Trek movies have their flaws, but that reinvigorated the financial aspects of the franchise, so that could then lead to Paramount Plus, which could lead through those bad shows, but then it might get us Strange New Worlds if that works out, or something down the road that might be good. You know, it's kind of like these Star Trek and Star Wars are now financial entities rather than creative entities. And so someone with a vision might be able to piggyback, like a Jon Favreau, for instance, might be able to piggyback on that IP, you know, that IP, that intellectual property. But in a way, there's a subversive quality to that, where they're kind of pulling something and kind of getting away with it because the quality doesn't impede the profits. You know, because quality, you know, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, gosh, it's a sad situation to be in, really, where we now have to sort of recognize, well, these things are really just there as a kind of content factory, and if we're lucky, a creative person with a bit of savvy might be able to pull something halfway decent out of it at some point.
Yes. But the new model, which is so interesting to me and interesting to my friends, is this whole notion of what I'm creating essentially is independent television, just like independent films sprang up in the 70s. You know, it's like, you know, there was no such thing in the 30s or the 40s or the 50s as independent film. Maybe Cassavetes coming up a little bit toward the end there, but very difficult to make independent movies. And then that came to fruition in the 70s, and then the big studios kind of became almost like indie releasers for a while, with Taxi Driver and all that stuff. But I'm making independent television. If the big boys or the studio / networks / whatever corporate, you know, monsters want to dance, then we can have those conversations. But I keep saying to my team, we're not waiting. We're in the content business. That's what we're doing. And I've been very lucky in my career, because someone, when I was writing for like Smurfs and shows like that, someone once asked me, are you writing for the child in the audience? And I said, no, I'm writing for the child in myself, because I knew that if I wrote something that entertained me, it would entertain my audience. And I'm very lucky in that way. So for instance, with Space Command, the reason it gets 97% thumbs up, the reason 3 million people have watched it and loved it, is because I wrote it because I wanted to write something that I would love. And if I love it, my audience, thank God, resonates to that. Whether it's Far Beyond the Stars or any of the things that I can put my name to, you know. And but for my entire career, as you said, 40 years plus, I just kind of use that as my you know, you have the tuning fork inside your heart that resonates to what speaks to you. And so that's what I followed. That I follow that tone when I hear it. And even now with the Showrunners Network, it's like, okay, we're creating shows that we love, and working with actors that we want to work with. So I'm creating an ensemble that I'm going to use over and over and over again, whether it's Mike Harney or Bob Picardo or Doug Jones, or, you know, Armin Shimmerman. These are actors who are a joy to work with, and I've wanted to work with Veronica Cartwright. I mean, she's in The Birds and Alien, and you know, and also Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I mean, my God, I mean, I've wanted to work with her forever. And
she can do Terrified like nobody else. Like,
yes,
she's great at that.
yes, she's wonderful. And you know, and so Bill Mumy, you know, got me in touch with her because I was working with Bill in Space Command. And so, you know, that's how it works. See, this is the other part of it. It was so cool. Science fiction conventions, you can meet these actors at the conventions. You know, it used to be when I was coming up, when I was a kid, actors were supposed to pay for their own photographs and send them to the fans and all that. And then someone had the genius idea of them signing, where you buy the picture signed by them. Now, some people are down on that, but I'm not, because, you know, if an actor spent 3 days or even 1 day making a Star Trek episode in 1967, and they might be living in a one-room shack. You know, they may be living impoverished lives, and to be able to go to a convention and make a few grand signing photos of themselves as a Telosian or whatever, you know, more power to them. Great. But it also allows me to meet a lot of these actors when I go to conventions, and I can strike up conversations, and then that might lead to me working with them. So that's access that if I wanted to meet Brad Pitt or Matt Damon or someone, I couldn't. They don't have conventions where you meet those guys, but
Yeah.
and but I can meet Gates McFadden or I've known Jonathan Frakes for a long time, but I mean he goes to those conventions too. So I often do go to those conventions just to meet these people, and then they can talk to their friends that I've been working with, and they give me a good report apparently, and we're off and running.